Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the San Antonio Marriage Initiative. I am so happy to introduce Scott Kedersha to you today. Scott's the marriage and family pastor at Harris Creek Baptist Church in Waco. He received his Master of Theology degree from Dallas Theological Seminary. Scott spent 20 years in marriage ministry, helping more than 5,000 pre-married couples and counseling thousands more. He is a pro at weddings. He's performed more than 100. Scott has also written a book called Ready or Not to help couples decide whether they should walk down that aisle. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me here, Amy. Grateful to be here with you.
Oh, well, we are just delighted to talk about your work. I know you have such a heart for newlyweds and pre-married couples. I mean, that's been really the bulk of your ministry experience. So tell me, how did that come about? Why do you care about them so much?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's not like I grew up in a home and I decided if I wanted to be a baseball player or a doctor or a marriage pastor. That's not what anyone ever thinks about or dreams about. And so it was definitely not what I planned to do. In fact, I thought I was going to be a business guy and then a physical therapist, and then eventually decided to go into full-time ministry. And marriage and family was never on my radar. And so really the biggest reason why I went into working with couples is because it was the job that was available when I graduated from seminary. It wasn't what I went to seminary for. It wasn't what I thought I would do, but it's the job that was there, and stepped into it and quickly loved it. I mean, just the chance to work with couples who were hungry to work on their relationship. They were scared of marriage, of making a wrong decision, of struggling. Like when you look around and you see so many people struggling. And so you've got a group of people who are really hungry for counsel. And so just saw how open they were, teachable. It was a great opportunity to share the gospel and a really good opportunity to see, lives change and eternities change. So really fell into it more than anything.
Oh. And I know as you've had your time, to be working in marriage and family, you do certainly counsel couples and took some of that experience of people with struggling marriages, and then you really kind of decided wanted to try to head that off at the pass, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of it is couples they just move forward and nobody's willing to encourage them where they're doing well or willing to have hard conversations with them. And so we saw this as a really good, just as the church I was at in Dallas, we saw it as a really good opportunity to point people towards Jesus, and then even to break some couples up. So if they were unequally yoked, if it was a believer and a non-believer, or even if it's two believers and they just can't ever resolve conflict, there are concerns about their relationship. We saw that as a really good way, lovingly, to maybe encourage them to not get married or to hit pause on the relationship. And we just wanted them to be really excited and as confident as you can be about your decision to move forward towards marriage.
Well, I am so glad that you mentioned some of those things. I know you took your experience and you put it into this great book, Ready or Not. Which you can see, of course, what I've done with it, as I do often when I look at books written by leaders like yourself. Um, you put some of your best insights in there, and you had, something, as you just mentioned, sometimes, this is kind of not conventional wisdom, but sometimes it's better for people not to go forward, like the or not part. What did you see there? And you had some personal experience with that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, partly, so I'll tell you my personal story in a minute, but the advantage of working as a marriage pastor is you get to see all sides of the equation. And so you see pre-married couples, you see newlyweds, and then you also see these couples who have been married for decades and almost wish they never made the decision to get married. And so we're able to sit in the seat of saying, look, if you keep making these decisions you're probably going to end up either divorced or miserable together. And so, even though it's really painful to think of the idea of hitting pause or breaking up, we really lovingly want to spare you from literally what might be decades and decades of frustration and misery together and not being joyful in marriage. And we would never, very rarely make that counsel on our own. There's typically other people who are around them who are saying the same thing. And so, yes, that's part of my story. So Kristen and I met, and she was actually one of my teachers. That's a fun part of our story. Is it's not as scandalous as it sounds, but she was one of my instructors when I was in grad school for physical therapy. And we started dating. It was very, very unhealthy. We crossed physical boundaries, emotional boundaries. We were immature spiritually, and thankfully, we had a great group of people around us who just said, "Hey, we think that you're headed in a really destructive direction, and because we really care for both of you, we think that you probably should consider breaking up," which was really, really, really hard to hear because I
Yeah.
was mildly obsessed with her, which is a good picture of part of the problem is I was more obsessed with Kristen than with Jesus. And so these really good friends encouraged us to break up, and we did. It was very mutual, if there is such a thing, but I think it was a mutual relationship. And I felt like Taylor Swift, we are never, ever, ever, ever getting back together. Is but like, yeah, that's how we joke now. Is like, I'm done, and we're never getting back together. And we both got really serious about Jesus. And what was really, really cool was like that same community who encouraged us to break up were the same ones who encouraged us to consider getting back together. They just said, "We see incredible differences in each of you." And we got back together, and it was like a radically different relationship. It was like we never even dated before because she loved Jesus more than me. I loved Jesus more than her, and everything was different in the way that we related. We were emotionally healthy, physically healthy. We didn't cross boundaries. We both were in a spiritually great spot. And it was pretty quick after that. It was the kind of thing that when we got married, everyone celebrated because it was a really different relationship.
Well, to close the circle on that one, I want you to say how many years you and Kristen have been married.
Yeah, so we just celebrated 20 years, and we
Oh,
got married the week of 9/11.
oh,
9/11 was on a Tuesday. We got married on Saturday, and
wow.
really, obviously a crazy, emotionally heavy week, but it was such a sweet, fun celebration at the end of a really hard week.
And now you guys even do ministry together, right? Because marriage ministry is a place where you can serve together.
We do, yeah. We get to do a lot together. Sometimes, sometimes it's as little as her helping me think through talks and like editing, content and being a thought partner, providing plenty of examples that we get to teach, and then or that I'll teach or we'll teach together, and then we get to speak together on a consistent basis, which is a ton of fun. We've gotten to lead small groups in our home, so we've led four groups of newlyweds. We've discipled them for 15 to 18 months, and so we've got to really open
Mm.
up our home and pour into them, and they in turn give back to us. It's been a really great experience to get to lead together in our home, and then we do get to teach together and do conferences, teaching stuff like that. It's super fun to get to do ministry together with my spouse, with Kristen.
Oh, well, and I think that's something great for our marriage champions to hear. First of all, that you do speak so they can find you, and also that that inspiration of being that couple that serves together in this ministry. And I think we would be remiss since we're talking to the marriage champions right now. Your book has an online component that they could reach through. Tell the marriage champions how they can find your online component if this is something they might want to use to do a small group, following your example.
Yeah, so the book itself has, it's 12 chapters with an appendix, and it's got discussion questions that a couple does on their own, and they discuss them together. But then we also partnered with Right Now Media, and so if your church or organization has access to Right Now Media, there's a collection of 13 videos that goes along with the book. They also put together a curriculum that goes with each of the chapters and each of the videos, and I'm I think their team did an amazing job. And so every one of the chapters of the book, there's a video that goes along with it, and so there's a video of a real couple that they get to see lived out, and then there's a short teaching that I do that goes along with each one of the chapters. And so it's a great resource that's pretty much off the shelf. It takes away a lot of the hard work on your end, and you still need to read the chapter, but it'll help you lead other couples through it or lead a group through it really easily.
When you and I had this conversation about the Right Now media, my pastor the very next week said, "Guess what, church? We've just signed up for this. We're sending you a link." It was the next week. I had not been familiar with it, but I am now. And I saw your book, and I saw the study, and so that's exactly where I went first to look at it. So
It's
I was so
awesome.
pleased. Yeah. Well, let's
Big
talk.
fans. There's so much great stuff on the Right Now Media has everything, and so I think they do an incredible job, and it's a wealth of really like-minded resources too. Like they vet everything carefully, and so I think they've done a really excellent job with their studies.
Well, and speaking of endorsements, this book is endorsed by some of the heavy hitters that you would see in the among national marriage leaders. But it did have a little bit of an unusual endorsement, a Bachelor contestant. Tell us about that. That's kind of an interesting connection you have.
Yeah, so Sean Lowe, who is kind of known as the Christian Bachelor, and I've never watched the show really, but I know it's a big deal, and so Sean met Catherine on the show, and they ended up getting married. But before they got married, they went through the pre-married class I helped lead in Watermar in Dallas at Watermar Community Church, and so they showed up. They went through the class. The class is was probably 150 couples, and they were just one of the couples in there. And of course, everyone thought it was kind of a big deal that they were in there, and um, would try to walk by his table, go out of the way, and to be honest, what was really cool is they were just one couple, just like everyone else. They had the same questions other couples did. They confessed when they fell short. They were humble. They participated in the discussion, and then we've kept up a friendship. I've been, encouraged that they're walking with the Lord and still active in their local church. They didn't go to our church; they were at another church in town, but they really stayed, consistent and loyal in their faith and their marriage. And I think they're 8 years married now. But he was really gracious to endorse the book, and has been a really big encouragement over the years.
Yeah, I like that. I thought that was so funny. And you said too that for that pre-married class that you taught, that you've taught over the years, that not everyone that comes to that class is a believer. And so it really is a great outreach opportunity for the gospel as well as because so why would a non-believer want to go to a Christian church class?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Man. We don't know the exact numbers, but I would probably, and I'm not at this church anymore. We moved to Waco, but it was so fun to be a part of this ministry. And probably 45% of the couples came from our church. Another 45 to 55%. Another 30 to 40% came from other churches, and there was always a collection of 15-20% of the couples who had no church affiliation whatsoever. And I consistently, Amy, I'd ask that same question, like, why would somebody come to a church that's going to speak from God's word? Why would they come? And a few thoughts came to mind. One is that the way they got there is that I heard this story over and over again. I love it. Is that a woman goes to get her hair cut, and her hairstylist, they're just having a conversation. The hairstylist is engaged, and the woman would say, "Hey, you need to come to this church or this class at our church." And the hairstylist would say, "No, I'm not interested. We're not really like religious or spiritual." They'd leave, and then a few days later, somebody else would come, sit in the chair, get their hair done, invite the person to the church, and over again, they just got worn down by people inviting them to come to this class. And so they'd sign up, they'd come, and so one is just the way the body of Christ works of inviting people to be a part of what the church is doing. Two, I don't most of the time somebody's not going to come. Like if you said we're doing a brand new series in our church on the book of Romans, as amazing as the book of Romans is, people are just not going to, if they're not believers, they're not going to come to church to hear a sermon on the book of Romans. But if you tell them we're doing a class that will help you in the most important human relationship on the planet, people just are willing to come. And so they would come, they'd show up. They thought we were crazy. We'd start talking about purity and tell them that sex is designed for marriage only, and keep your hands off each other. And we don't believe in same-sex marriage. We believe in a biblical definition of marriage. What you see around you on TV and culture and society is not the way that we teach, and they would still come and they thought we were a little bit crazy, but they were cared for, they were loved, they were challenged, and they just kept coming back. And so not all of them did. Some of them would kind of peace out after the first week, but most of them stuck around. And and we told them from up front, you may think we're crazy in the way that we, talk about marriage and about sex and relationships. But even if you disagree, you'd be a foolish to not benefit on how to communicate well and how to resolve conflict and how to steward your finances and how to engage with in-laws and how to deal with differences in personality. And so even if they thought we were crazy, even if they didn't agree, they continued to come back because they were cared for and because we gave them really good counsel.
Well, speaking of that counsel, you kind of hit some really brief highlights, but let's talk some more because the book is 12 conversations every couple needs to have before marriage. So, what are those conversations? How did you set this up, and what do you think are those important conversations people need to have?
Yes, I mean it's really it's the basics of what couples need on relationships. And so what I found is that couples may really like each other, they may be attracted to each other, but they really don't know how to think rightly about what marriage looks like. And so, in the book, I wanted to give them a really biblical, authentic, practical look at marriage. Here's what you need to know, here's what you can expect. And then I wanted to teach it in a really straightforward biblical way on what would best prepare them for marriage. And so there's nothing, very, very little in there that somebody would go, wow, I can't believe you're talking about that. They're all the things that I struggled with or that I saw other couples struggle with. And so like money and communication, how to resolve conflict, how do you deal with your differences? If one is incredibly extroverted, the other one's introverted. Um, how do you engage with in-laws and with your own family? How do you think about friendships?
Yeah.
Um, like a big one is just really think through like having fun in your relationship. And so I see married couples or engaged couples get married. They used to have a ton of fun before they got married, and then they get married and they become like an old boring married couple. And that was part of my story. We like you get married, you have kids, and you just never have any fun anymore. And so, like research shows, if a couple, one of the most common factors in couples who have affairs is that they're bored in their marriage. And so again, that's a huge problem. If couples get married and they're bored and they go start looking for fun outside of marriage, I go, what do we do to help couples from the beginning while they're dating, while they're engaged, while they're newlyweds, when they have kids, all the way through their lives? How do we encourage them to have fun together? So that's one of the chapters that, no pun intended, was a lot of fun to think about and put together. So they're all the things that that Chris and I work through, and that you would expect married couples and hope married couples would talk through.
One of the questions that you had in there for the couples, and you kind of have it like you kind of address a subject and then you have a place for each to separately think through some of those topics, write them down, and then come discuss them together and then pray together about each of the 12 questions. So that's kind of the format. But one of the questions that I noticed you mentioned that I have never seen in any other book that I've read is one of those questions you ask the couples even what they would do if they were struggling with infertility. And
Mm.
that's really an issue that's kind of one of those quiet, silent ones. And that too, maybe if you thought that you were ready to be sexually active in marriage, and then that's not as easy as you thought it was going to be. That's another kind of
Yeah.
different area.
Yeah, I've seen, a few thoughts on that. I mean, one of them is that uh, it's been hard, and I'm just sad for. It's so common that couples will not have sex before marriage, and so they think, well, we're honoring God and we're not having sex, and then they get married and they think everything is going to be easy and work just like they expect it to, and it's really hard. That's an area of a relationship that's really tricky and challenging for couples, that things just don't work like they thought they would. Another one is with infertility, that the expectation is that we're gonna um, we're not ready for a baby yet, and so we're gonna take different measures to not have a baby, and then whenever we wanna have a baby, it's just gonna happen
Yeah.
because people don't talk about it, and so, yeah, what I wanted in the book was just for them to think through, here's some of the things that may happen, and I've learned infertility is so common, and it's not his fault, it's not her fault, and so, their answer may change between when they get married and after they get married, but at least I wanted them to think through, here are some an example of a really significant personal challenge you may face, and what are you gonna do? How are you gonna make decisions on the other side of it if this isn't part of your story?
Yeah, and that's something I've not seen before in any other resource, and I think it's very real and important.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
any other thoughts there about another place that you thought um, you talk about discussing your holidays and um, peace and unity. Anything else that's was kind of a favorite or crucial foundational principle from the book that you really liked?
Yeah, I think the idea of, so the word intimacy, and so I think it's defined in there, and I don't know if I came up with it or somebody else, probably from somebody else, but to know and to be known without fear of rejection. And
Mm,
so typically when you hear the word intimacy, people think one thing, they think sex and physical. Second, they may think spiritual intimacy. But one of the chapters is on emotional intimacy of what does it look like to be real, to be honest,
mm,
about your past. And so, like, one of the hardest things for couples to figure out is how much of my past do I share? How much of my past sexually, how much of rejection, addiction, all of that. And so, how do you deal with your past? And how much of that do you discuss? Current reality and current struggles. And so before we get married, how much of my struggles do I deal with? Do I share with you if I struggle with pornography or lust or addiction or fears and anxiety? How much of that do you share? And then another biggie is just the future. So past, present, and future. Here's what I want to see happen in the future. Here are my hopes and dreams.
mm,
And if you can't share those things with the person that you're going to be one flesh with,
mm,
like if you're terrified of what they're going to say, if you think they're going to reject you, then
mm.
I don't think you want to marry somebody like that. And so I'm sure books covered. I just hadn't seen it in a marriage prep book, but thinking about what does it look like to be one flesh, to be emotionally intimate
Mm.
in marriage. And so trying to help them think rightly about a really big deal, like again, talking about hopes and fears and expectations, and how do you discuss that in a way that draws you closer together instead of pushing you apart.
Well, and that kind of brings us back to what you were saying about sometimes people should break up. And the way you
Mm,
phrase that in the book is you call it the red stoplight.
yeah.
What are some of the other reasons that someone might need to do the red stoplight?
Yeah, it's a great question. And everyone, I've seen multiple lists on this, but one is just an inability to communicate and resolve conflict. And so if we're not good at that naturally. Most people can't communicate and resolve conflict well. But in the book, in relationship with a mentor couple, in a marriage prep class, if you cannot learn how to communicate, how to resolve conflict, and you continually struggle, I'm like, man, you are signing up for a really, really difficult road ahead. And so, in the beginning of a relationship, if you can't communicate and resolve conflict, you're absolutely normal. But if you continue to struggle with it, then that's a red flag. Any kind of abuse whatsoever. So, if there's even a hint of physical abuse before you get married, break up. Emotional abuse can be the same way, and the verbal abuse. You're signing up to marry and to be with this person for the rest of your life, and if you have like, I just don't want that for you or for a couple if that's part of your story. An unaddressed addiction, and so there's two ways I would say this. Let's say it's pornography, so prevalent for men, so prevalent for women. And so if lust and porn is a part of somebody's story, that makes them very normal. It's a very normal sin struggle. But if you are somebody who is unwilling to address that struggle and you think once I get married, that addiction and struggle and temptation will go away, you're living in a fantasy world, like a fake world that's not real. And so that's one. And so I typically, if somebody looks at porn when they're dating and they quickly confess it and they invite others in and they say, "This is a problem, I need help," that that doesn't concern me nearly as much as the person who habitually looks, who never confesses, who thinks it's going to go away. And so just an unaddressed addiction. There are others, but another biggie is if you've got really great friends who love the Lord, and you've got parents who love the Lord, and if they all look at your relationship and say, "Hey, we're really concerned," that's a time when you hit the pause button and say, "Okay, I want to know why everyone is concerned." If there's 100 people that say yes, and there's one person who's opposed, that's a different story. But if the resounding voice of trusted people is hit pause or break up, then I would be really I would want you to listen to people who love you and want God's best for you. They're not trying to steal your joy or rip you off. They're trying to prevent you from having what they collectively think would be a really tough future together as a couple.
Well, and then in the appendix, as you alluded to, you actually have a guide on how to do that well. And like you said, and even as with you and Kristen, it maybe doesn't have to be for forever. Maybe it is just a pause, but you do address that and give some ways, involving prayer, and then how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is do I believe that people really care for me and love me? If my parents, who my dad has passed away, stepdad's passed away, but hypothetically, if mom and dad who love me and who love Jesus and who want God's best for me, if they're, pleading with me and begging me to pause, or they're concerned, then why would I not be willing to listen to them? And again, if my community, my small group, life group, cell group, whatever you call it, if they're people who love Jesus and who love me and they have concerns, then uh, why would I not humbly want to listen to what they have to say and to seek to understand before moving forward against anyone's counsel? Anytime, look at proverb after proverb talks about the wisdom of the counsel of many, and Proverbs 13:20, he who walks with the wise grows wise, a companion of fools will suffer harm. If you've got wise people around you, I want you to listen to them. And that applies to all of us, not just pre-married couples, but every one of us. If we've got wise people, let's listen to the wise instead of acting like a fool. And when you reject the counsel of wise people, then you become a fool.
Well, and speaking as someone who has sons, in their young adult sons, the fact that a parent would actually take that risk to express concerns, that's telling you that your parent really feels strongly. If
Yeah.
they're going to be negative about somebody that you're dating or thinking of marrying, then it's not just like a little niggling concern. It's something big
Yeah.
that they want you to notice. I think we would be remiss, Scott, if we didn't talk about, have taken ready or not, and you're making it into a prayer guide, right? Let's take a few minutes just to go over that and what you're working on.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. So it won't come out until October of 2023, but it will be with Baker Books again. And it's gonna be working title is Ready or Not Prayer Guide. But here's what led to this book is I was studying for a talk on spiritual intimacy with married couples, and I kept stumbling across statistics and references to um, incredibly low divorce rates for couples who pray together consistently. And so, one out of 100, maybe even one out of 1,000. There was a Gallup study that said one out of 1,000 couples who, if you pray together out loud on a consistent basis with your spouse, your divorce rate is ridiculously low. And so, even if it's 1 out of 10, right? If there's something that if I can go from 1 out of 2 to 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000, if there's something that I can do that's going to increase our likelihood of being together joyfully, then I want to know what that is. And so started to think through the best time to start praying for your marriage is not after you get married. It's not after you've been married 10 years, 20 years. The best time to start praying is today. And so, so it's going to be 100 different attributes to pray for your marriage, for yourself, for your significant other. There's a whole list of them, but there are things like I pray that our marriage would be filled with fun, that we would be resilient, that when the world is trying to tear us down, that we're going to be tough enough to keep going, that it's going to be a marriage that's humble.
Mm.
God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And so I don't want God opposing me. I want to be humble, from the beginning. I want Kristen to be humble, or I want our marriage to be humble, that we continue to be willing to listen to and learn from others. I want us to be generous,
Mm.
right? That we would take what God has entrusted to us, and we wouldn't just build a bigger home and drive a nicer car and send our kids to more expensive schools, and we would be known as a couple who generously gives. And so I'm so excited about it because I really believe if we pray these things into our relationship, I just like I can't wait to see what God does in our lives as we live these out as a couple and then multiply it out. If God will continue to answer those prayers, to make us all of these things that candidly are not step back. They're not things that make a great marriage. These are things that mark Jesus Christ.
Mm.
And so if we pray to become more like Jesus, if a husband does that and a wife does that, then I just believe that our marriages will be markedly different than the rest of the world.
Well, and I think praying to be like Jesus is definitely one of those that he would sign with an amen.
Yes,
And we'll see that realized. And who doesn't want that realized in their marriages? So,
that's right. That's right.
well, Scott, it's been so much fun talking with you. We could just keep going on forever, but our time is gone. So, thank you so much for being with us again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Grateful for all that you all are doing, and uh, like I'm thankful for all the ways that you are modeling what it looks like as a city to care for marriages and to work together with other churches and ministries. I think we can all learn from that. We're trying to learn from that in Waco. So grateful for all that you and your team are doing.
Well, it is great to be on this journey together. And marriage champions, if you want to connect with Scott, you can always find us at samarriage.org.